Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Mariah Monique to talk about corporate sponsors and other ways of generating revenue. Mariah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me. Excited to be here.
So, for those people who are hearing you for the very first time, could you share your superhero origin story?
Absolutely. So, I come from a background in the healthcare sector where I sponsored nonprofit organizations for about 7 or 8 years. And I'm a trained public health professional. So, a lot of what I did in my sponsorship role was really looking at organizations, clinics, hospitals, and community based orgs that were doing work in the Los Angeles area as it aligned with things like social determinants of health and ensuring that people could have optimal health by being supported in other areas outside of direct medical care. And so I started the sponsorship catalyst about 4 years ago in order to really close the gap to help nonprofit organizations understand how to navigate the sponsorship space, primarily because in 2020, as you all know, many things happened that year. And there were many shifts in the dollars of sponsorships from many different brands across the nation. And so, with that shift came a responsibility and really a call response, essentially, for nonprofits to step into it. And what I found while I was working during that time was realizing that a lot of nonprofits either knew that sponsorships existed but did not know or did not have the skill to navigate the space, or they did not know at all that sponsorships should be a stream of their income because they were heavily either focused on grants or individual donors and they did not know how to navigate this space. And so that birthed the Sponsorship Catalyst, where I empower nonprofit organizations, particularly in the health and human service space, on how to secure event sponsorships and really how to build long-term partners through the events as well as the day-to-day programming that they're hosting within their organization. The purpose of it is really so that organizations can increase their revenue, right, which would increase their reach in the community, but also their partnership and ultimately their impact. So the Sponsorship Catalyst really does look to work with nonprofit organizations that are really ready to merge what they're doing with partners, whether there be local, regional, or national brands, to essentially increase their impact in the world.
I love it. And like there was a lot of shifts. I mean, there was a big one obviously in 2020. There was one last year or this year with
Yeah.
new political type. What I'm noticing, what I'm getting the sense of is that, to your point, a lot of organizations, nonprofit organizations, really depended the majority of the revenue on either grants or donors. And
Yeah.
I think these kinds of challenges are creating new ideas in the minds of nonprofits to say, okay, we can't depend necessarily on grants as much as we used to. We need
Mhm.
to diversify our income. We need to figure out new ways of tapping into getting money. And I love that. I mean, I appreciate that sponsorship is one of them. And I want to talk about that a lot, of course, today. I'm just curious to know your perspective on just, rising up to the challenge of saying we're used to working in this particular model, and now we have to challenge that because we're not able to get the same amount of income we used to get from the, various grants. So I'm curious to know, what your perspective is on just reminding organizations to keep an open mind and to try for different variations of finding revenue.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when you think about your fundraising plan, right, for the year, I like to visualize this in like if I'm looking at like a pie, and you got different slices, whatever size the slices might be, you want to make sure that your whole pie is not in one basket, essentially. So diversification is always going to be important, whether that is grants, individual donors, whether there's corporate dollars, whether it's sponsorships, whether it's maybe you have a social enterprise and now you're actually selling a product or service to the masses for them to be able to pour into what you're doing. So I think it's really important and it's a great time for people to assess that, right? Because of what's happening currently in the sector, it is requiring that people actually take a step back to assess what they've been doing, which is a great thing, although it's kind of detrimental to the work of the sector. However, had these things not happened, people wouldn't have been looking at where is our money coming from, and how do we make sure we diversify so that if anybody leaves, we still can stay afloat. I even talk about this need for diversification even with sponsors, right? So I've seen this several times where people are so dependent on the one or two sponsors that they have. This also started happening in 2020, and people started shifting dollars, and it's happening now where people are shifting their dollars, but they're so dependent on a couple of sponsors that have come year after year without going after new relationships and keeping new relationships in the pipeline. So if anyone falls out, you at least have cultivated some relationships that you can pull in at any given moment. And so I think what happens because nonprofits are wearing many different hats, oftentimes understaffed and doing a lot of impactful work, that sometimes we're just not thinking about that I need to constantly be building relationships with other folks outside of who's existent in the portfolio of funders. And so when I think about diversifying, I think it's a really important um, need to really cultivate relationships constantly, bringing people in the pipeline, because you just never know if a grantor may fall out, if a sponsor may fall out, if an individual donor may decide, I don't want to give anymore, or maybe they or age out, right? And now they're deceased. And so you have to deal with what that might look like. So I think it's always important for an organization to annually assess that, as you may annually plan for the year, to really determine how you're going to bring in new dollars that will help the organization be sustainable over time.
Right. It's all about building diversification and resilience in the sense of
Absolutely.
it's the same thing as in the consulting world, right? I don't want to depend on one client, a whale client, they call it typically, that was able
Hmm.
to sustain my whole business. And then if that whale client decides to leave, all of a sudden you lose, 80%, 90% of your revenue. That's always a bad idea. So to have your
Yeah,
finger in multiple pies, so to speak, has always been an important concept for consultants. And it looks like, by one way or another, the nonprofit or world has to entertain and play with this idea now going forward as well. They can't just have their finger in one pie
absolutely.
to say, we get 80% of revenue from one source, whether you said a grant or one particular enterprise. You're constantly
Yeah,
creating and building, maintaining relationships so that you can swap in one source when one leaves or relatively quickly.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about a bit more then about corporate sponsorships,
Hmm.
because they are a fantastic source of revenue. High level, what does a good partnership look like with a corporate sponsor? Like, if you were to just, because you mentioned the word partner, by the way, when you did talk about
Hmm.
sponsorship. So what does that partnership kind of look like high level?
Yeah, so I would say when you are partnering with a brand and through sponsorship, whether it be for an event or whether it be for something else that your organization is doing. Now, I will say most brands only support events because sponsorships are meant to be experiential, right? They're built around an experience, and so brands know that when they are working with any company or organization, that they're going to attach that sponsorship typically to an event. And so when I think about corporate sponsors and what a good ideal partnership looks like, it is one that is perfectly aligned, right? So seamless, where the missions of both brands can be integrated, where there's messaging and then there's a story that can be told really from both ends. I think about partnerships that also are impactful, right? So sometimes people will secure partners maybe because they have an existing relationship, or maybe because they believe it's just a good partner to just bring to an event. But there's not always good alignment, which means that partner might come for one time, but they may not keep coming back. And you really want to create some recurrent income by aligning with sponsors that are aligned with your brand. And so when I think about strong partnerships that are built, they have great brand alignment. They're able to tell a story year after year. And this is really where a lot of the sponsorship industry is going towards. They're looking for opportunities to create stories, right? To have that storytelling piece strongly embedded in the overall partnership that they are doing with any organization or any brand. And then I think about the other aspect of that is really having that flexibility for that brand that's going to come on board as a sponsor to really create, right? Create what their experience, whether it be at your community fair or whether it be at your luncheon or workshop series, whatever that might look like, your conference, allowing sponsors the flexibility to create what they need to create, not only to achieve their own internal goals, but also to bring an experience to the audience that you're going to drive to that event. And so partnerships that work well really do have a mutual benefit for both parties. And traditionally in the nonprofit space, it's been very one-sided. I mean, I still see this in today's landscape where nonprofits will go to a sponsor and they come to the sponsor more so from this, can you donate? Can you give to me type of mentality versus saying and using stronger language like, hey, I'm inviting you to be a partner in the impact that we're making. That's very different than like, can you donate? And the reason being is because sponsorship is not a donation, it's a marketing tool. So when you go to those brands, understanding the value that you have as a nonprofit organization, then you can go to those brands and invite them into that impact because you know that there's some alignment with both parties, and they're going to get just as much out of it that you would get out of it in an exchange of dollars that they might give you. So making sure that that partnership that you have with a particular partner or sponsor is aligned, but then also really thinking about what happens beyond this one-time event. Like the one-time event really is just like the beginning of a relationship. And when I say that, if you cultivate it right, that one-time event can turn into not just multiple events, but now that company could decide, we want to be a little bit more ingrained in the overall landscape of this nonprofit organization. We love the work that they do. We love working with them. We can clearly see alignment with some of the direction and things that we're going in that this nonprofit can be a solution for. So nonprofits really have to develop the mindset that you are the solution for a for-profit brand. And in partnership with that brand, you really bring a lot of value that they don't have, right? Like a captive audience that you've been building trust with, that you have subject matter expertise. It's really no different than being an influencer marketer, right? Brands buy into influencer marketers because they have a community. Nonprofits have communities that they serve. It doesn't matter what that community is. You serve a community. You have an audience. You have trust with that audience, and you have some level of influence in their behavior, their thought processes, or their values. And so really thinking about some of the ways that you can partner with these brands to ensure that that mutual benefit is there for both parties versus it being one-sided, and really thinking beyond this one-time event. How do I really cultivate this relationship over time so that we're so baked into this brand that they actually do think about us, and or they might actually budget for us within their budget year after year. And that's where you really get to a partnership. Not all sponsors are partners, but most partners, I would argue to say that all partners are actually probably sponsors. And there is a difference. Partnership is more of like a marriage, where sponsorship could be very transactional, could be very one not one-sided, but transactional, and as well as it could be a one-time thing. But when you can get a sponsor to come on board year after year, and now you all are kind of baking in a partnership, that's a lot more sustainable, and it creates a lot of longevity on that partnership.
I don't consider the word transaction to be a bad word. It's an exchange of good services of value, really.
Mm-hmm.
That one organization has something that the other one wants. Well, each organization has what the other one wants, and they just agreed to exchange their value. So to me, whether it's a one-time transaction or a multiple transactions, this is not a bad thing to do. And I think by
Yeah.
seeing it in that with that frame, it's actually a good way because, to your point, instead of going up to the organization or the corporate sponsor and saying, "Look, please donate," it's that we have something to offer you. We actually have
Yeah.
value. To your point, in exchange, we are looking for dollars, but it's not like a unfair transaction. There is if it's done well and it's done with intent,
Yeah.
and alignment, a lot of stuff you mentioned, then there is an exchange of equal value but different value, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I was going to actually add to that. So,
sure.
to your point, I do agree with that. I do, however, think that if people want to not have to be on like this hamster wheel of going out to get funders, it would be smart for them to ensure that that one-time transaction does turn into something that's long-term, right? Because that's where that sustainability and longevity comes. However, the ideal of it being transactional, of course, to your point, there's just a value exchange. And you can decide as a nonprofit if you want to continue that relationship, right? You might not want to have a long-term relationship with a particular partner for whatever reason. And you have the power, right, to choose that. And I think sometimes people feel like, I have this brand and I have to do X, Y, and Z in order to get them to fund. Now that's coming from a scarcity mindset, a maybe desperate mindset, but it's like, no, actually, this relationship still works for me, or it doesn't, or no longer works for what we're trying to do, and people have to be unemotionally attached, right, to the results, and unemotionally attached to how their partnerships can form over time. And I think that just helps people stay grounded. And it also helps people just understand that, like, these relationships potentially can come or go, but some of them may actually stay long term.
Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly. You mentioned also the word brand. To me, when I think about it, and especially when corporate sponsorships at events, I think of, they're paying for their names to be pasted everywhere, maybe a lanyard, maybe different thing. I would imagine that in order for you to want, as an organization or a nonprofit organization, to want to partner with a corporate sponsor, I mean, the idea of the brand image really has to be aligned with what you're trying to achieve, right?
Absolutely.
If you have a conflicting message, that I don't think would work too well. So I
Yeah.
guess, is there any kind of recommendations or considerations that nonprofit organizations should have when trying to choose a corporate sponsor?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, just kind of speaking to what I spoke to earlier, there has to be alignment, right? Their mission, their values. And I think now more than ever, because of just what has happened over the last several years, people are really more cognizant and more aware and will point out, right, if values don't align. And so, I think when nonprofits are seeking support and partnership from these different brands, that there needs to be alignment. And the reason why I also say that in terms of like missions and values, because sometimes, you really have to think through like the fact that when you partner with someone, their reputation, what they do, also can damage your reputation. So I tell nonprofits all the time, you have the power to walk away. You also have the power to just not engage with a particular brand if it does not align with your organization's mission, even if it aligns with the type of work you do. So I had a client. This was a few years ago, and they were in the adventure space, and particularly they were all about helping Black and Brown people get into nature, and just really, get grounded in nature. And I recommended a few companies that would be aligned with, sporting, adventurous types of efforts. And they were like, oh no, we can't work with them because they don't support like Black and Brown. Like, it's just very clear. And I told them, okay, that's okay. You don't have to work with them. You can find other brands that might work. Or they were like, I don't want to promote this brand because, they don't support. And it's like, you can make that decision. It's all within your power. And you just have to understand that, like, yeah, you may not be able to secure the financial commitment. That's okay. There's workarounds. There's plenty of brands and companies out there that do sponsorships, particularly because it's a marketing opportunity for them. So most brands have marketing line items in their budget. And when you are looking to help them essentially market to the audience that you've captivated and that you've been working with, because you know it's maybe something that your audience needs. Because I also teach, like, you're not selling your audience because you built trust with them. You're bringing people into your ecosystem that you know your audience needs. This is why it's important to understand your audience data, not just the demographics, but understanding the psychographics of your audience, which requires that you dig a little deeper to understand who it is that you're serving, whether it's your day-to-day programming or whether it's at your events. What do they value? What are their interests? And you bring those partners to the space that will meet the needs of the people that will be attending. And so when you think about brands and partnering with them and making sure there's mission alignment and values alignment, it's going to be really important that you do due diligence on the front end, whether that means you're looking at their website, you're looking at their social media pages. I mean, you can tell a lot about a brand based off of, the type of visuals they use, the type of words that they use, if they are standing up, right, for causes that happen throughout the year. Like, you can tell a lot about a brand. So I definitely will encourage folks to definitely do their due diligence, but also feel empowered to walk away from a deal that does not align, because your brand reputation is also on the line as you partner. And the same for a company. As a company, they're also considering, if I work with this nonprofit, is that going to be okay with my brand? That's why you see a lot of bigger brands going for established, large nonprofit organizations, because their brands are tested, they're tried, they're true, they've been around for a very long time. And going with the newer brand for some, I'm sorry, going with the newer organization for some brands may not be ideal because there's not enough established reputation within that brand. So it just varies depending on the different company and what their needs are and what they're looking for. But from a nonprofit standpoint, you definitely want to make sure they're in alignment with what you do, how you do it, who you serve, and then you're bringing them into a space that that your audience needs, because you understand your audience data.
So I think it's pretty clear about alignment, but what about not being unaligned? Because I'm talking about more like the fringe cases. Like, I'll give you a really simple, silly example, but it's the first thing that popped into my head, right? Sometimes I go to car shows to see what the latest cars look like year after year, right? And at these car shows, they will have other sponsors that are doing adjacent type stuff. Like, they may be waxing your cars or
Mm,
buffers or different things. It makes sense, it's still part of the thing. But then you have some of them that are like kitchen supplies.
mm.
So it's not like it's kitchen supplies to me is a neutral. It's not really aligned to cars. But I guess people who have cars have houses sometimes. I don't know what the connection is, but there's some. It's not like
Exactly.
it's, but it's not like it's not like a motorcycle sponsor. A motorcycle sponsor to me
Yeah.
would be could be considered to be a competition of cars versus motorcycles or whatever form of transportation you want to make. The idea is
Mhm.
that would be an unalignment. But what if it's a not unalignment, like the housing type stuff or a housing type of equipment? Sure. I mean, maybe they just want foot traffic and whatnot. So I guess my question is, again, it's clear when you are choosing a corporate sponsor that is aligned. And it's clear when they're not aligned. But what about when they're just kind of in the middle, where it's neutral, where you can go either way? What would you recommend in those situations?
I love this example, and I love that you brought that up, because I totally see alignment, right? And it depends on how they pitch that. So if I'm going to host an event and there's 500 to 1,000 people coming through, I know the socioeconomic status of those people. They're coming for cars, but to your point, they may have a house. They may be on the market for a house. So I'm not going to also, you know, I may just have a brand that's going to be selling kitchen supplies, but I also may have a bank because they might need financing. So it doesn't have anything to do with the cars necessarily, but this is why psychographics is important, because you need to be able to understand, hey, I know what my audience needs, what their lifestyle is. Let's say, for instance, Let's say, for instance, you had a lot of recent college grads. Well, college grads, they might be going into the housing market. They're gonna get their big boy and big girl job. So you need a bank. They might be in tech, right? So you bring in tech companies to be a part of that event, even though you're serving college students. So it's really about understanding who your audience is, and and when you understand them, you should have several segments of your audience. So, for instance, let's say we're taking this example of being at a car show. Some of the folks might have families. So, what does it look like to bring in some resources that also offer things for kids? And so, again, this is how we think beyond that particular industry. So, I worked a lot in the health space. And with a lot of clients that I work with, they did health related, health and human service type of work. The point was to help them understand you can secure more than just health related type of brands. Why? Because these people, again, they need financial literacy. They might need some education. You might bring universities on board with that. They might want retail stores, whether that be a grocery store or like a clothing store. They might need additional things. And being able to host like some sort of fair or a festival, you really do have an opportunity to bring in many resources. I would consider them as auxiliary to the main thing, but they're helpful. So now your audience is like, wow, I went to this event. They had a lot of what I needed. Maybe they don't have time to go do certain things, but you were able to bring that resource right to them. Now they have clarity, direction, resources, and they might been able to complete things that they couldn't have completed. So it's important to also think about these industry adjacent features, but also these industries that there's not clear alignment to the event, but there's clear alignment to the people at the event. So hopefully that helps your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Up until now, we've been talking about events and corporate sponsors. I'm curious to know, well, first of all, events also seem to be in-person events as opposed to virtual events. So would you say the same thing can apply for virtual events? And part two of the question is, what about non-events? Any other ideas that corporate sponsors could be involved in that are not an event-oriented theme?
Yeah, I see a combination of in person and virtual. Obviously, 2020, a lot of things went virtual, but we do still see some of that happening, right? Where people are leveraging these virtual platforms that allow for multi-dimensional engagement versus like Zoom, where you can't really do too much in terms of branding. I mean, you could brand it, but that's pretty much all you'll be able to do. There's not a lot of like engagement for sponsors to be in dedicated breakout rooms where people can just kind of go in and out, such as like what you might see on an app like Wova, who is a app platform for virtual events as well as using it for conferences, things of that nature while people are in person. So when you use, I think it's called Wova, maybe Hoover.
Huva, yeah,
So,
I know.
oh, Hoover. Okay, great. So when you have virtual events, I definitely do encourage folks to leverage some sort of platform that would allow for more of that engagement with the audience and the sponsors, or being able to have their branding in multiple spots on those platforms. I think would be very helpful. We do see less virtual events, but they definitely are still happening because what one thing that 2020 taught us is that virtual events really did expand reach and impact across the nation and globally. And so brands are okay with that. However, the in-person experience really is stronger in terms of being impressionable on people's minds. And when we talk about events in the sponsorship space, so there's a few things with that. So sponsors know, and this is just statistically, sponsors know by partnering with nonprofit organizations, they can potentially increase their ROI by 11 to 20%. And that's a wide range, but 11 to 20% is pretty substantial just by partnering with a nonprofit organization that is in alignment with their audience, with their goals, things of that nature. And so when you think about a sponsorship, because it is not like a traditional donation type of tool or stream of income, it is marketing. And so brands know that being connected to an experience, it's got a lot more emotional power, ability to emotionally connect with the audience than maybe traditional marketing like a billboard or like a commercial. And so when brands are partnering with any company or organization and they're creating these experiences on site, they know they get an opportunity to engage one-on-one with folks in person, right? They know they get an opportunity to impress their brand, right, on people's minds, so that if you decide, you know what, I need to go get some laundry detergent, and the first thing you're going to think about is, wow, I just engaged with this Tide brand, at this last event. It was phenomenal. They had bubbles and they had all this stuff. You're going to think about that brand. It's how marketing works. And so that's why oftentimes it is tied to events. Now, when it comes to sponsoring things that are not event specific, it's going to vary from brand to brand. I have found that most brands that I've worked with do not sponsor things outside of specific events. However, I do know there are some out there that do support organizations and for profits that are not hosting events. What I've seen has been like things like a email campaign where you all are building out some sort of campaign together, and they decide they're going to, in exchange for it coming from you, that campaign coming from you, they're going to give you X amount of dollars. They know that you have a substantial email list that is actually engaged, so they might do something like that. We see the same thing through social media where people are willing to give X amount of dollars to push a particular type of messaging through a nonprofit as it relates with that nonprofit. So it might be a lot of co-branded type of things. I've even done this in the past as a sponsor where as a health plan, we would connect with organizations who were subject matter experts on things like mental health that we were not necessarily experts on. And so we would partner with an organization that had that expertise. We would co-brand, different social media posts, and we would run those during Mental Health Awareness Month. We did not have to create that, right? Because we were not the subject matter experts. So we leaned on them to do it in exchange for the dollars that we gave that organization. Having that co-branded just showed that we supported mental health and we were working in partnership with this brand who is well known in the community to support mental health. So there's definitely some digital things that can be done. What I will encourage folks is, as you're engaging with your sponsors, engage in dialogue with them regarding how their sponsorship program works to determine if they sponsor things outside of events. Another thing that comes up as well is, especially around emergencies, people create these funds to have some sort of response to crises that happened. And some sponsors, they're willing to say, hey, we can give to your fund. Fine. But then there's some sponsors that say, hey, we cannot do that. I've experienced that as a funder as well. And so every brand is going to be different with their policies and how they run their sponsorship program. But 9 times out of 10, their focus is going to be primarily events. And if they move outside of that, it will be on a case-by-case basis. It's going to vary from brand to brand, which is why it's important when you're engaging with these brands and able to have conversations with them, whether it be email or over the phone, you should be asking the right questions to understand how can we expand this beyond this one-time event so that you can understand how to navigate future ads that you may have of this brand that are not aligned with your annual events or your annual workshop series, whatever that might look like.
So jumping into the communication with corporate sponsors, I mean, obviously it could probably be a podcast episode on itself, but I'm curious to know, high level, what are the differences, or if there's any different kinds of tools or considerations that organizations and nonprofit organizations could keep in mind when talking to corporate sponsors that are different than talking to a grant or a major gift donor or an individual donor? Like, what, at the tactical level, the day-to-day type of thing, what are the differences between the corporate sponsor and non-corporate sponsors?
So I would say there are 2 things. One, when you're talking to sponsors, You're essentially building a relationship. You're doing that with your grantors, you're doing that with individual donors. The difference, I would say, is with sponsors, you want to be very clear and very concise. When you're writing a grant proposal, you've got to add every detail and every data point in those grant proposals. When you're developing things, messaging and sponsorship materials for sponsors, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, but you want the information to flow as a story so they can understand the vision that you're trying to execute upon. And so the difference that I see is concise, it's shorter, it's more clear, and you're taking out all of the fluff. The other piece that I would say I see is that you are ensuring that when you're pitching to a sponsor, it is very clear of what's in it for them. Reason being is because this is not a one-sided thing, so sponsors want to make sure that when they sponsor something, there is an even exchange, even though that exchange is not like, they give you money, you give them money. It's not a one for one. It's that exchange of getting that brand exposure through whatever brand benefits you're going to offer a sponsor in a package. So understanding that you're not just pitching your event and saying, can you be a part of it? You're pitching your event, inviting them to be a part of it, and offering reasons why they should be a part of it and what's going to be the benefit for them in exchange for the dollars that they would give to an organization. So you have to really communicate that to ensure that they understand it. Otherwise, they're going to have a lot of follow-up questions, or they may decide, I don't understand it. A confused mind always says no. So you want to make sure that there's clarity, but then you also want to make sure that you've communicated and articulated what that sponsor is going to receive out of that exchange.
I totally agree with the conciseness part of that comment because as a podcast host, I'm getting now more and more organizations contacting me saying, hey, we got this great guest. And they give me like this super long email that I have to read about why I shouldn't have this guest on my show and the benefits. And then and I look at it and I don't even want to read it. And it gets clear to
Yeah.
me, first of all, that AI wrote it, which already turns me off. 4 or 5 paragraphs, hefty paragraphs. And it's like, I don't have the desire to read this to be convinced about bringing on like, keep it short and sweet. I know it's a very weird
Yeah.
analogy, but keep it short and sweet. Tell me, like, give me bullet points. I don't want to read a novel to see if the answer should be yes or no. So I totally appreciate
Yeah.
the conciseness part when talking to corporate sponsors. I think in general, we should always try to keep messaging short between people, but in some stories or some situations, you need to create that story behind it. So yeah,
For sure.
underlining the keep it short and sweet.
Yes.
And speaking of AI, I'm always curious to know, in your space and how you've seen either you work or organizations, corporate organizations or nonprofit organizations, how has AI influenced this world in the past couple of years? And where do you think it'll influence the next couple of years?
That's a great question. So I really think that it is making the job easier in so many ways. Like, I think nonprofits definitely should leverage AI when it comes to creating things for your sponsors or whoever in your funding sources or funding streams, because it really does allow you to workshop what you've put together, right? Whether it's a sponsorship deck and you run that sponsorship deck through the AI platform and say, hey, act as a sponsorship funder. Here's a sponsorship deck from an organization. Read through it. Let me know if it makes sense. Analyze it. Would you fund it? If you were to see this, how much would you fund it for based on what's presented? And allow AI to really run through that. I've used AI and also coach clients to use AI as a starter point, especially when you're trying to identify brands to work with. Most people really struggle with the initial contact. So you leverage AI by prompting it in a way where it's going to populate. You may say, hey, give me 10 organizations, give me 10 brands in this particular city that support this type of work. Put it in a matrix because I like to see things in grids. Put it in a matrix. Let me know what their funding pillars are. Let me know what dollar amount range they should support in. And then let me know if there's a contact. And AI will push out that information for you. Now, it's not always 100%. So you do have to do some due diligence and just to make sure that things are accurate. However, it will spark some inspiration or bring some clarity and direction on the next step that you should be making. So I think AI is going to be very, very helpful with partnerships. And I think people should be leveraging it in order to streamline what they're doing. Even if you are about to have a meeting with a sponsor, hey, I'm about to have a meeting with a sponsor. Create 10 questions that I should ask when I'm on the call to make sure that I'm getting enough information to take back to the team so we can build out a sponsorship package. Those types of things AI can be helpful with. That way, when you go into that meeting, you've not spent a lot of time thinking about questions, but you go into that meeting picking a few of the questions that AI pushed out in order to ask that brand so that you can glean enough information to craft a proposal that makes sense for that brand. So I definitely think that brain AI is here to stay. I think that it's just going to evolve over time. And I've seen people, even people in the sports industry that are, closing $1 million sponsorships, right? For a sports badge or naming rights. They leverage AI and they clean it up and make it authentic, more authentic before sending it. But they leverage AI for emails, for drafting proposals, for analyzing data and information for them to be able to create things that would be ideal for brands. And I've seen that both from people who sell sponsorships in the sports industry, but also people who buy them in the sports industry. So it is definitely something that's going to be here to stay. And nonprofits should not be afraid of it. You should lean into it because people are leveraging it in order to close sponsorship deals for sure.
This is the first time I've heard of using an AI to anticipate a response. And that I
Oh
love
yeah.
saying, we are going to submit this to this organization. How would they respond? That is a beautiful use of AI that flips the
Yeah.
script. And usually it's the AI writing it, not the AI criticizing what you've written, which is awesome. I
Oh
thank you for
yeah.
sharing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, leaning into the superhero theme of the podcast, I was curious to know if you had a magic wand or a superpower to be able to change something in the landscape of how nonprofit organizations fundraise or gather money or do corporate sponsors, what would you change?
I would change mindsets. Um, I would change mindsets because, the industries are shifting collectively. They're all shifting. And I think that, nonprofit industry tend to lag behind. But if I can change mindsets to help them understand the world of possibilities that are out there for them to do the impactful work that they do on a daily basis for the communities that they serve, that will be my superpower. And really helping them understand that they have so much value that the for-profit industry needs, but also their community, right? So you all truly are the connectors of both the for-profit and the nonprofit space. And I think that if people could understand the value that they have and their uniqueness of their organizations, they would really think differently about how they're navigating getting funding, but also how they're navigating, making impact on a larger scale that allows them to be able to potentially even be blueprints for other programs across the nation and even in other countries. So that's what I would say. Definitely changing mindsets, helping people to not be afraid to be early adopters of what our nation or what our world, right, is experiencing in terms of different shifts, technology shifts that are happening. And so that's what I would definitely want to change.
Awesome. Maria, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm curious to know if people have a desire to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Absolutely, Alex, and thank you for having me. So, if folks want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Mariah Monique. That's where I am primarily, or you can email me at Mariah at the sponsorshipcatalyst.com if you have other questions or you want to work with me. You also can go to my website at www.thesponsorshipcatalyst.com.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for doing what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. Have an amazing day.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.